Construction worker who finds 70-year-old letter tracks down the original writer. Louis Shaw tended not to think about the memories and lives connected in the homes he demolished. It only complicated his job. But when his crew came across an old-fashioned letter during one project, he couldn't stay detached. Its contents were so moving that he had to go digging into the writer's story. Louis Shaw and his family were on a job at a client's home in Caversham, Reading, England. The family's construction business, Shaw & Sons Limited, was to tear down the chimney in the 1930s semi-detached house. Everything was business as usual until one surprising find. Inside the chimney, the family of construction workers found a crumpled old letter in the rubble. It was written by a young boy named David, and he was very humbly asking for some gifts from a famous man. It read, "Dear Father Christmas, please can you send me a Rupert annual and a drum box of chalks, soldiers and Indians, slippers, silk tie, and any little toys you have to spare. Love, David." The Christmas list is incredibly moving, especially given the time in history it was written. Louis and his family learned that the letter was written around 1945. England survived the Second World War as well as a great financial depression, and the economy was at last making a comeback. Many other kids might have greedily asked for lots of new toys. On the other hand, little David didn't want much, filling the letter to Santa with care and many X's for kisses to the big jolly man. After uncovering it roughly 60 years later, Louis Shaw was moved by the letter for very personal reasons. Louis had 2 children of his own and never saw any humility on their Christmas lists. In his own words, "It makes you think how we really take things for granted now." He wanted to honor little David, so Louis decided to find him and return the letter. He figured that because the letter was a part of David's childhood, he would enjoy reminiscing about those innocent memories. But with only a first name to go on, Louis would have to do some digging to find David. Louis learned that the house had been in the previous family for 2 generations before the current owner bought it. With that, he and his colleagues believed that young David was the old owner's son. Louis was able to find help from local residents who had lived in the neighborhood since the 1930s. Thinking back to life in those days, they gave Louis some breakthrough information. The neighbors remembered little David's family and were able to provide Louis with David's last name, Halleck. With more complete information, he hoped an internet search would bring him closer to returning the previous letter to its owner. Louis took to Facebook to make contact with David. He posted a photo of the letter, searched the full name, and created #FindDavid. The hashtag spread across the internet, and with continued help from one particular neighbor, Louis was able to make the connection. In just a few days, Louis connected with David, who was no longer the little boy who wrote that charming letter. He grew up, married, and had grandchildren to write letters of their own. Still, he has never forgotten his own childhood, so he was excited to see what Louis had in store. Louis was right to say that the letter would bring back so many memories. David's parents bought the old house back in the 1940s and lived in it for 40 years until they passed away in 1986. To be reunited with a piece of his childhood and his beloved parents was a fantastic gift. But Louis had more. The Shaws were given permission by the current owner to bring David back to his childhood home. There, David was met with another surprise that brought everything full circle. Before meeting with David, Louis and his family banded together to give the senior his entire Christmas list. The Rupert annual, a drum box of chalks, soldiers and Indians, slippers, a silk tie, and some toys were all laid out before them. David's grandchildren were as amazed as David. David shared his memory with BBC News. "I can remember bending down with my mother and putting the letter up the chimney and waiting for the draught to take it up." He was happy to say he could share new memories like this with his grandchildren, though it would be greatly different from his time. David's grandchildren don't write out their Christmas letters. Instead, they email, which David is happy with. Seeing as it's taken more than 70 years for the letter to get to Father Christmas, I think email is probably the best, David said. He's embracing a new tradition for the holiday while still holding on to another. With his presents he wished for finally in hand, David had no problem for Christmas Day to open them. The blissful memories from his Christmas letter are enough to hold him till then. David and Louis were able to share this special moment together with both of their families. It was a proud moment for the Shaws who'd never experienced anything like it before. As traditions change, it's comforting to know that there are people who are still connected to each other, whether it's an email to Santa, a community-building hashtag, or a humble letter from a child.